she fed a quiet stranger on a park bench every morning for 7 years, never asking who he was, never needing to know. But on her wedding day, the truth arrived in the form of 100 Marines in full uniform. Welcome to Dust Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The worn plastic spoon scraped the bottom of the yogurt container with a familiar, hollow sound. Amelia sighed, not in frustration, but in a quiet acknowledgement of another day beginning just like the last. For 7 years, this had been part of her pre-dawn ritual. Prepare a small, nourishing breakfast, not just for herself, but for Mr. Henderson, the silent man who occupied the same weathered bench in Elmwood Park. She never called him by his first name, though she'd learned it was Thomas from a discarded library card she'd once found near his usual spot. He was always just Mr. Henderson, a fixture in her life as immutable as the sunrise. She packed the yogurt, a banana, and a small bottle of water into a paper bag, adding a folded napkin. Outside, the city was still draped in the cool, gray light of early morning. As she walked the 3 blocks to the park, the air crisp against her cheeks, she saw Mrs. Gable from apartment 3B, already walking her yapping terrier. The older woman nodded curtly, her gaze flicking to the paper bag in Amelia's hand and then away, a subtle disapproval that Amelia had grown accustomed to. It was the same look she received from others. The well-meaning friends who suggested she donate to a shelter instead, the colleagues who implied her efforts were a waste of time, even her own mother who worried about her safety. Still feeding that vagrant? Mrs. Gable had asked once, her voice laced with a pity that felt more like condescension. There are services for people like him, dear. You shouldn't encourage it. Amelia had merely smiled and continued on her way. How could she explain the unspoken understanding she felt with Mr. Henderson? The quiet dignity in his eyes, the way he always nodded his thanks, never asking for more, never expecting anything. How could she articulate that this small act was as much for her as it was for him, a daily anchor of simple, unadulterated kindness in a world that often felt too complicated? He was there, as always, huddled in his oversized, threadbare coat, even though the spring mornings were growing milder. His silver hair was matted, his beard unkempt, but his posture, even in sleep, held a certain rigidity, a discipline that seemed out of place with his circumstances. Amelia approached quietly, placing the bag beside him on the bench. He stirred, his eyes opening slowly, clearing with a practiced speed that always surprised her. He looked at the bag, then at Amelia, and gave his customary nod. No words were ever exchanged beyond a murmured good morning from her. Yet, in that shared silence, a bond had formed, fragile yet resilient, woven from countless sunrises and small paper bags. As she turned to leave, a younger man jogging past paused, his expensive headphones pushed back. He looked from Mr. Henderson to Amelia, a smirk playing on his lips. "You know," he said, his voice loud in the quiet park, "you're probably just enabling him. He'll never get off the streets if people keep giving him handouts." Amelia felt a familiar flush creep up her neck, but she met his gaze evenly. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but today he won't be hungry." The jogger snorted and resumed his run, shaking his head. Amelia watched him go, the judgment stinging less than it used to. She didn't do this for approval or to solve the vast complexities of homelessness. She did it because it felt right, because Mr. Henderson was a human being who deserved to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be offered a moment of care. What the jogger, Mrs. Gable, and so many others didn't know, couldn't possibly comprehend, was the depth of the story that lay hidden beneath Mr. Henderson's ragged exterior, or the extraordinary way this simple, 7-year ritual was about to intersect with a future Amelia couldn't yet imagine, a future involving vows, a white dress, and an astonishing display of honor that would leave an entire town speechless. Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Amelia continued her walk to the small bakery where she worked, the scent of yeast and sugar a comforting embrace. The encounter in the park, though brief, lingered in her thoughts. It wasn't the first time she'd faced criticism, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. Her fiancé, David, a kind and pragmatic architect, often worried. "I just don't want you to get hurt, Leah," he'd say, his brow furrowed. You don't know anything about him. What if he's dangerous? She understood his concern. Truly she did. But Mr. Henderson had never shown anything but quiet gratitude. There was a profound sadness in his eyes, yes, but no menace. She'd once seen him gently move a stray kitten from the path of an oncoming bicycle, his large, calloused hand surprisingly tender. That single act had solidified her conviction that beneath the layers of hardship was a good man. The wedding plans were in full swing, a joyful chaos that consumed most of her free time. Invitations had been sent, the venue booked, her dress carefully chosen. It was a simple, elegant affair they were planning, a reflection of their own personalities. Amidst the flurry of decisions about floral arrangements and seating charts, her morning ritual with Mr. Henderson remained a constant, a quiet counterpoint to the mounting excitement. Sometimes, as she sat addressing envelopes or discussing cake flavors with David, her mind would drift to the man on the park bench. She wondered about his life before, what series of misfortunes had led him to this point. Had he ever been married? Did he have children? There were no clues, only the guarded sorrow in his gaze and the military precision with which he folded the empty paper bag each day before tucking it into his coat pocket. This particular detail always struck her, the neatness, the order in such a disordered existence. It hinted at a past discipline, a life where things had their place. Occasionally, she would leave an old paperback novel with his breakfast, something she'd enjoyed, and the next day it would be gone, replaced by the neatly folded bag. He never commented, but she liked to imagine him reading, escaping for a few hours into another world. The judgment from others, however, began to escalate subtly as the wedding approached. David's mother, a well-intentioned but rather socially conscious woman, had once driven past the park as Amelia was leaving the bag. Later, over tea, she delicately inquired, "Amelia, dear, I know your heart is in the right place, but perhaps it's time to redirect your charitable efforts? Especially now with the wedding. People do talk." The implication was clear. Her association with a homeless man might reflect poorly on their family. Amelia had felt a surge of defensiveness, but she'd merely smiled and changed the subject. It was easier than trying to explain something that even she didn't fully understand. Yet, the small, persistent criticisms, like water dripping on a stone, began to wear at her. She found herself looking over her shoulder more often as she approached the park, a flicker of self-consciousness dimming the simple joy of her routine. She started varying her time slightly, hoping to avoid the joggers or the early morning dog walkers. It was a small compromise, but it felt like a betrayal of the straightforwardness that had defined her interactions with Mr. Henderson. One blustery April morning, about a month before the wedding, she found Mr. Henderson looking particularly frail. A harsh cough racked his thin frame, and his face was pale beneath the grime. Amelia's heart ached. Along with his usual breakfast, she'd brought a small, new blanket and a pair of warm socks. She placed them beside the bag, her hand hesitating for a moment before she gently touched his arm. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice softer than usual, "please take these. It's still so cold in the mornings." He looked at the blanket, then at her, his eyes, usually so guarded, holding a flicker of something unreadable. For the first time in 7 years, he spoke more than a single syllable. "Thank you, child," he rasped, his voice gravelly from disuse. "You are too kind." The words, simple as they were, felt momentous. Amelia could only nod, a lump forming in her throat before she turned and hurried away, her own eyes surprisingly moist. That brief exchange, that acknowledgement of her sustained effort, erased weeks of doubt and self-consciousness. It reaffirmed her belief in the simple power of human connection, a connection that transcended societal judgment and outward appearances. She resolved then that Mr. Henderson would be at her wedding. The thought was sudden, unexpected, yet it felt undeniably right. He was, in his own quiet way, a significant part of her life. How she would make it happen, she didn't yet know. But the seed was planted. Do you believe that true kindness persists even in the face of social pressure? Or do we all, at some point, bend to the expectations of others? Perhaps it's the acts performed when no one is watching, or when they're watching with disapproval, that reveal our truest character. The decision to invite Mr. Henderson to her wedding felt like a quiet act of defiance, a personal stand against the unspoken judgments she had faced. When she broached the subject with David, his initial reaction was one of surprise, quickly followed by concern. "Leah, are you sure? I mean, it's wonderful that you care for him, but a wedding, it's a formal event. Will he be comfortable? Will our guests?" His questions were valid, echoing the societal norms they both understood. Amelia took a deep breath. "David, for 7 years, he's been a constant in my life. A silent, dignified presence. This wedding is about celebrating love and the important people in our lives. And in his own way, he's important to me. It wouldn't feel right if he wasn't there, knowing he's just a few blocks away alone." She explained her plan. She would discreetly buy him a new suit, arrange for him to have a shower and a shave at a local community center that offered such services with dignity. She wouldn't pressure him, merely extend the invitation. David, seeing the quiet determination in her eyes, the same determination that had first drawn him to her, finally nodded. "Okay, Leah, if it means that much to you, we'll make it work. But we need to be prepared for some reactions." Amelia knew he was right. She steeled herself for potential awkwardness, for the raised eyebrows and whispered comments. But the image of Mr. Henderson, clean-shaven and in a respectable suit, sharing in her day, outweighed any social anxieties. The next morning, along with his breakfast, she tucked a carefully worded, handwritten note into the bag. It was a simple invitation, explaining the date and time, and offering her help with attire and transport if he wished to attend. She made no demands, expressed no expectations, simply extended the offer from her heart. For several days, there was no response. Mr. Henderson took the bag as usual, nodded his thanks, and the note remained unmentioned. Amelia began to think he would decline, perhaps finding the idea too overwhelming or inappropriate. She wouldn't blame him if he did. Then, one morning as she placed the bag down, he cleared his throat. "The wedding," he said, his voice still raspy but clearer than before. "I would be honored." Amelia's heart leaped. A wide smile spread across her face. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, I'm so glad." Over the next few weeks, in brief, quiet conversations, they made the arrangements. He was surprisingly amenable, his initial shyness giving way to a quiet sort of anticipation. Amelia bought a simple, dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a conservative tie from a local department store, choosing sizes she guessed would fit his lean frame. She arranged with a friend who volunteered at a downtown outreach center for Mr. Henderson to use their facilities on the morning of the wedding. She even bought him a new pair of shoes, sturdy and polished. Each step felt like a small victory against the indifference he had faced for so long. Meanwhile, the subtle resistance from others continued. When David's mother learned of the invitation, her smile was strained. "That's very progressive of you, Amelia. I do hope he behaves himself." Even her own maid of honor, her closest friend Sarah, had expressed reservations. "Leah, I love your compassion, but are you sure this isn't a bit much? It's your wedding day. You don't want any distractions." Amelia found herself defending her decision more often than she'd anticipated. "He's a person, Sarah, not a distraction, and he deserves to be treated with dignity." The effort it took to coordinate everything for Mr. Henderson, on top of the final wedding preparations, was considerable. There were moments when Amelia felt overwhelmed, when the societal anxieties whispered doubts in her ear. But then she would remember his quiet, "Thank you, child," or the flicker of anticipation in his eyes, and her resolve would harden. This was more than just an invitation. It was a statement about the kind of world she wanted to live in, the kind of person she wanted to be. She was not naive. She knew one act of kindness wouldn't magically solve Mr. Henderson's problems. But for one day, she could offer him a seat at the table, a place where he was not an outcast, but an honored guest. She was, in essence, extending the same courtesy, the same fundamental respect she had shown him every morning in the park, but on a grander, more public scale. It was a risk, certainly, but some risks, she was beginning to understand, were essential if one was to live a life of genuine meaning. The reactions of others, the whispers and stares, would be a small price to pay for upholding her own values. What is the true measure of compassion? Is it grand gestures or the quiet, consistent acts of kindness that often go unnoticed? And when faced with societal disapproval, how many of us would choose the harder path, the one that aligns with our heart rather than popular opinion? The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, a perfect late spring day. Amelia's apartment buzzed with activity, bridesmaids chattering, the scent of hairspray mingling with coffee, her mother fussing over her veil. Amidst it all, Amelia felt a calm she hadn't anticipated. She had done all she could. Her friend Mark had picked up Mr. Henderson early that morning and taken him to the outreach center. Mark had reported back that Mr. Henderson was quiet but cooperative, and that the transformation, even just with a shower and a shave, was remarkable. Amelia had left the new suit and shoes with Mark, along with a small, handwritten card simply saying, "Looking forward to celebrating with you." Amelia, as she stepped into her wedding dress, a classic ivory gown that shimmered subtly in the light, she caught her reflection. She looked like a bride, outwardly serene, but beneath the surface, a small knot of anxiety remained. How would Mr. Henderson be received? Would he feel comfortable, or would the stares of strangers make him regret accepting? She pushed the worries aside. Today was about joy, about commitment, about love in all its forms. The ceremony was held in a beautifully restored historic building downtown, its tall windows flooding the main hall with natural light. Guests mingled, champagne flutes clinked, and a string quartet played softly. Amelia, escorted by her beaming father, walked down the aisle towards David, her heart full. As she stood at the altar, her gaze swept across the assembled faces, family, friends, colleagues. And then she saw him, seated discreetly in a pew towards the back, almost blending into the shadows, was Mr. Henderson. He was impeccably dressed in the dark suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed. He looked different, younger somehow. The deep lines of hardship on his face were still there, but they were softened, no longer the most prominent feature. What struck her most was his posture. He sat ramrod straight, his hands resting formally on his knees, an air of quiet dignity about him that was even more pronounced than usual. He caught her eye and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a hint of a smile touching his lips. In that moment, all of Amelia's anxieties vanished, replaced by a profound sense of rightness. He belonged here. Throughout the ceremony, Amelia was aware of him, not in a distracting way, but as a reassuring presence. She noticed a few curious glances cast in his direction, a whispered comment between two of David's aunts, but largely, he sat undisturbed, a silent observer. During the vows, as she pledged her life to David, she felt a tear escape and trace a path down her cheek. It was a tear of happiness, of love, but also, in a small way, a tear of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment, a journey that included 7 years of quiet mornings in Elmwood Park. The reception followed in an adjacent ballroom. As guests found their tables, Amelia made a point of going over to Mr. Henderson. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice warm, "I'm so happy you could make it. Are you comfortable?" He stood respectfully as she approached. "Miss Amelia," he corrected gently, his voice surprisingly steady. "It is I who should be thanking you. This is a kindness I haven't known in many years." His eyes, clear and direct, held a depth of emotion that touched her deeply. "Please," she said, "enjoy yourself. There's plenty of food and drink." He nodded. "I will. And congratulations to you and your young man. May you have many years of happiness." Amelia introduced him to David, who shook his hand firmly, his smile genuine. "It's an honor to finally meet you, sir," David said, his earlier reservations seemingly forgotten. "Amelia has told me, well, she cares a great deal." Mr. Henderson simply inclined his head, a quiet acknowledgement. As the evening progressed, Amelia watched him from afar. He ate sparingly, nursed a single glass of water, and mostly observed the festivities with a polite, reserved interest. He didn't attempt to mingle. nor did he look out of place. He simply was a figure of quiet integrity in a sea of celebration. The true test, Amelia knew, would be the reactions of others over a longer period. But for now, in a warm glow of the reception, with music playing and laughter filling the air, his presence felt not like a disruption, but a quiet testament to the expansive nature of kindness. It was a reminder that the circles of our lives can, and perhaps should, extend beyond the familiar and the comfortable. It begged the question, who defines who belongs at our celebrations, at our tables? Is it society or the quiet dictates of our own hearts? The wedding reception was in full swing. Music pulsed, laughter echoed, and the dance floor was a swirl of colors and movement. Amelia, radiant in her gown, found herself momentarily disengaged from the happy chaos, her eyes instinctively searching for Mr. Henderson. He was still at his table near the back, nursing his water, a picture of quiet composure. She noticed that a few of David's younger cousins, initially curious, had drifted over and were attempting to engage him in conversation. To her surprise, Mr. Henderson was responding, his answers brief but polite, a faint smile even gracing his lips. It was more interaction than she had ever seen from him. Perhaps the warmth of the occasion, the sheer unexpectedness of being included, was coaxing him out of his shell, however slightly. David's mother, however, was a different story. Amelia saw her approach Mr. Henderson's table, her expression a mixture of forced politeness and thinly veiled scrutiny. Amelia tensed, preparing to intervene if necessary. Mrs. Albright, a formidable woman when she chose to be, clearly felt it her duty to assess this unusual guest. From across the room, Amelia couldn't hear their words, but she watched the body language. Mr. Henderson remained seated, inclining his head respectfully as Mrs. Albright spoke. He listened more than he talked, his demeanor deferential but not subservient. After a few minutes, much to Amelia's relief, Mrs. Albright nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Surprise? Grudging respect? And moved on. Later, David's mother sought Amelia out. "Well," she said, a note of bewilderment in her voice, "he's certainly quiet. Very proper. He wouldn't even tell me his first name. Just Mr. Henderson, ma'am." Amelia smiled. "That's just him, Mrs. Albright. He's a very private man. He did mention," David's mother continued, almost reluctantly, "that he knew your father. Briefly. Years ago. Something about a project they worked on." Amelia frowned. "My father? He never mentioned that to me." Her father had passed away when Amelia was in college, a kind, unassuming man who had worked as a civil engineer. It seemed unlikely, yet Mr. Henderson's disciplined nature, his quiet dignity, suddenly took on a new light. Could there be a connection she had never imagined? This small, unexpected piece of information added another layer to the mystery of the man she had befriended. It was a reminder that everyone carries a history, a tapestry of experiences often hidden from view. The first hint of the day's truly extraordinary turn came subtly. A few of the younger staff members of the venue began to whisper amongst themselves, their eyes darting towards the main entrance of the ballroom. A low murmur started to spread among the guests closest to the doors. Amelia, caught up in a dance with her father-in-law, initially paid it no mind. Then, the music seemed to falter, the chatter died down, and a hush fell over the room. Heads began to turn, not towards the bridal table, but towards the entrance. Amelia and David exchanged a puzzled glance. What was happening? The main ballroom doors, usually kept partially closed, were now being pushed wide open by the venue manager, his face a mask of astonishment and deference. Standing framed in the doorway, silhouetted against the brighter light of the lobby, were figures. Not just a few, but many. Tall, imposing figures standing in perfect, disciplined formation. As her eyes adjusted, Amelia's breath caught in her throat. They were Marines. Dozens of them. Perhaps, as her mind struggled to process the sight, even 100. All in full dress blues, their white hats pristine, their posture radiating an unshakable discipline and solemn purpose. They didn't speak, didn't move, simply stood there, a silent, formidable presence that instantly commanded the attention of every person in the room. The string quartet, which had resumed playing softly, trailed off into silence. Champagne glasses were lowered. Conversations ceased mid-sentence. The joyous, celebratory atmosphere of the wedding reception was suddenly charged with an entirely different kind of energy. Awe, respect, and a profound sense of unfolding significance. Who were they? Why were they here? And what did this astonishing, unexpected arrival have to do with her wedding, with her, or perhaps with the quiet, unassuming man sitting at the back of the room? The questions hung in the air, unspoken but palpable, as every eye in the room fixed on the silent assembly of Marines. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a stark contrast to the joyous revelry of moments before. Amelia felt David's hand instinctively tighten on hers. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a mixture of confusion, awe, and a dawning, inexplicable premonition. The Marines remained motionless at the entrance, a sea of blue and white, their faces stoic, their presence overwhelming. Then, one figure detached himself from the group and began to walk slowly, deliberately, into the center of the room. He was older than the others, his hair tinged with gray at the temples, his uniform adorned with an array of ribbons and insignia that spoke of a long and distinguished career. A colonel, Amelia registered numbly, her mind struggling to make sense of the scene. He stopped a few feet from the bridal table, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling, not on Amelia or David, but on the figure seated at the back, Mr. Henderson. The colonel's expression, initially stern and formal, softened almost imperceptibly. He drew himself up to his full height, a commanding presence even without the backdrop of his uniform contingent. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice resonated through the silent room, clear and authoritative, yet tinged with an unexpected emotion. "We apologize for the intrusion on this joyous occasion." He paused, then turned slightly, his eyes finding Amelia. "But we are here today on a matter of profound importance. We are here to honor a hero." A collective gasp, soft but audible, rippled through the guests. Hero? Amelia's mind raced. Who were they talking about? Surely not. Her gaze flickered to Mr. Henderson. He was no longer looking down. He was watching the colonel, his expression unreadable, but his posture, if possible, even straighter, more alert. It was the posture of a soldier. The colonel continued, his voice now filled with a deep, resonant respect. "Many years ago, in a forgotten conflict, in a place far from home, a young sergeant repeatedly risked his life to save his men. During one particularly brutal engagement, pinned down under heavy enemy fire, with communications cut and casualties mounting, this sergeant, despite being wounded himself, organized a defensive perimeter, tended to the injured, and single-handedly held off an advancing enemy force long enough for reinforcements to arrive, saving the lives of his entire platoon." The story hung in the air, vivid and harrowing. Guests leaned forward, captivated, their earlier confusion replaced by rapt attention. Amelia felt a shiver trace its way down her spine. The colonel's eyes returned to Mr. Henderson. That sergeant never sought recognition. He never spoke of his valor. When he returned home, bearing wounds both visible and invisible, he faded into the quiet anonymity of civilian life, his sacrifices largely unknown, his heroism uncelebrated by the nation he served so selflessly. He took another step closer to Mr. Henderson's table. For years, many of us who served with him, many of us who owe him our lives, searched for him. We feared he was lost to us forever. Now, the colonel's gaze shifted directly to Amelia, and his voice, when he spoke again, was thick with emotion. "And then, we learned of a young woman. A woman who, for 7 years, without fanfare, without expectation of reward, showed daily kindness to a forgotten man on a park bench. She offered him food, yes, but more importantly, she offered him dignity. She saw past the ragged exterior and acknowledged the human being within. She reminded him, and in turn us, that compassion is not a finite resource." He turned back to face the room, his voice ringing with conviction. That forgotten man, that quiet hero, is Thomas Henderson. Sergeant Thomas Henderson, United States Marine Corps, retired. A wave of shock and understanding swept through the ballroom. Eyes turned to Mr. Henderson, no longer with curiosity or pity, but with a dawning, profound respect. David's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The jogger from the park, who happened to be a distant cousin of David's and was present at the wedding, stared, his face paling. Mr. Henderson himself looked down at his hands, a muscle working in his jaw, the only outward sign of the emotion that must have been raging within him. The colonel's voice softened again, but lost none of its power. "Miss Amelia," he said, addressing her directly, "your quiet, persistent kindness did more than feed a hungry man. It kept a flicker of hope alive in a hero's heart. It reminded him that he was not entirely forgotten. And in doing so, you embodied the very essence of the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis. Always faithful, faithful to him, when so many others were not. What does it truly mean to honor someone? Is it through grand monuments and public declarations? Or can it also be found in the quiet, steadfast acts of compassion that ask for nothing in return? And what if those small acts unknowingly touch a life of such profound, hidden significance?" The colonel's words hung in the air, a powerful testament to both heroism and humanity. Amelia stood speechless, tears welling in her eyes, not just for Mr. Henderson, Sergeant Henderson, but for the immense, unexpected honor being bestowed upon him, and by extension, upon her simple acts of kindness. David's arm was a steadying presence around her waist. The guests remained silent, transfixed by the unfolding drama, a wedding reception transformed into a scene of profound recognition. The colonel then made a gesture. From the ranks of Marines still standing at the entrance, another officer stepped forward, carrying a small, velvet-covered box. He approached Mr. Henderson's table with measured, respectful steps. Mr. Henderson slowly rose to his feet, his movements stiff but dignified. The years of hardship seemed to fall away in that moment, replaced by the bearing of a soldier answering a call to duty. The younger officer opened the box, revealing a medal, gleaming under the soft lights of the ballroom. Amelia recognized it from documentaries and news reports. The Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor for Valor in Combat. "Sergeant Thomas Henderson," the colonel announced, his voice filled with emotion. "On behalf of a grateful nation, and with the authority vested in me by the President of the United States, it is my profound honor to belatedly present you with this Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in action." The officer carefully pinned the medal to the lapel of Mr. Henderson's borrowed suit. For a long moment, Sergeant Henderson simply stared down at the medal, his weathered face a mask of conflicting emotions. Then, slowly, he raised his head, his eyes, clear and bright, meeting the colonel's. He drew himself up even straighter and executed a salute, crisp and precise, a gesture that spoke volumes of his training, his service, and the core of the man he was. The colonel returned the salute with equal solemnity. And then, as if on a silent command, every Marine in the room, all 100 of them, snapped to attention and rendered a salute, their movements perfectly synchronized, a powerful, unified display of respect for their brother in arms. The sight was breathtaking. The sheer force of their collective honor filled the room, a palpable wave of emotion that washed over everyone present. Guests rose to their feet, tears streaming down many faces. Even the most cynical among them were visibly moved. The silence was broken by a single, spontaneous burst of applause, which quickly swelled into a thunderous ovation, echoing through the ballroom, a heartfelt tribute to a hero long overlooked. Sergeant Henderson remained standing, facing his comrades, the medal gleaming on his chest, his expression one of quiet, profound gratitude. He did not speak, but his eyes conveyed more than words ever could. Amelia, watching him, felt an overwhelming sense of humility. Her small acts of kindness, offered without any knowledge of his past, had somehow played a part in this extraordinary moment. It was a powerful affirmation that compassion, offered freely and without agenda, could have ripples far beyond one's imagination. The colonel then turned his attention back to Amelia and David. "Miss Amelia, Mr. David," he said, his formal tone softening. "We understand that Sergeant Henderson has been a recipient of your kindness for many years. We also understand that you invited him here today, not knowing his history, but simply because you valued him as a human being. That act, in itself, speaks volumes about your character." He gestured to the assembled Marines. "These men, and many more like them, represent units that Sergeant Henderson served with, or men whose lives he directly or indirectly impacted. When word reached us of his circumstances and of your wedding, they insisted on being here, not just to honor him, but to honor you for recognizing the hero they always knew him to be, even when he was hidden in plain sight." He then presented Amelia with a beautifully framed certificate from a men of the 1st, 3rd, and 5th Marine Regiments, a small token of our immense gratitude for your compassion and humanity. You have shown us what Semper Fidelis truly means in everyday life. Amelia accepted the certificate, her hands trembling. I don't know what to say," she stammered, overwhelmed. He was hungry." The colonel smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "Sometimes, Miss Amelia, he was hungry is the most profound reason of all. It's the starting point for everything else. How often do we pass by individuals, making assumptions based on their appearance or circumstances, never knowing the stories they carry, the battles they've fought, or the heroism that might lie dormant within them? This moment served as a stark reminder that dignity is inherent, and heroism can be found in the most unexpected of places and in the most unassuming of people." The applause gradually subsided, but the atmosphere in the ballroom remained charged with emotion. Guests looked at Sergeant Henderson with newfound awe and respect. Many approached him, one by one, to shake his hand, to offer a word of thanks or admiration. He received them all with quiet dignity, his responses brief but heartfelt. Amelia watched as David's mother, her face etched with a mixture of shock and contrition, approached Sergeant Henderson. She spoke to him for a few moments, her voice low, and Amelia saw Sergeant Henderson nod gravely. Whatever was said, it seemed to bring a measure of peace to Mrs. Albright, who then turned and gave Amelia a look that was part apology, part profound respect. The jogger who had taunted Amelia in the park weeks earlier, looking deeply ashamed, made his way to Sergeant Henderson and mumbled an apology that Amelia couldn't quite hear, but the sergeant clapped him briefly on the shoulder, a gesture of forgiveness. The Marines, after their formal presentation, did not immediately depart. Instead, at the colonel's subtle signal, they dispersed amongst the guests, not as an occupying force, but as fellow attendees. They accepted glasses of water or soda, spoke quietly with guests who approached them, their presence adding an extraordinary layer of honor and solemnity to the celebration. Many of them made a point of seeking out Amelia and David, offering their personal congratulations and expressing their gratitude for Amelia's kindness to one of their own. Each handshake, each quiet word of thanks, deepened Amelia's understanding of the profound brotherhood these men shared, a bond forged in hardship and loyalty that extended far beyond the battlefield. One young Marine, no older than her own brother, approached her, his eyes shining with emotion. "Ma'am," he said, his voice earnest, "what you did for Sergeant Henderson, it means more to us than you can know. We look out for our own, but sometimes people fall through the cracks. You didn't let him stay there. You reminded us all what true loyalty looks like." The wedding reception, which had started as a personal celebration of love, had transformed into something much larger, a celebration of heroism, of compassion, of the enduring power of the human spirit. The meticulously planned schedule was forgotten. The cake remained uncut for a while longer. The dance floor was temporarily quiet. Instead, guests talked, shared stories, and absorbed the significance of what they had witnessed. Later in the evening, as things began to settle into a new, more reflective rhythm, Amelia found a moment alone with Sergeant Henderson. He was standing near a window, looking out at the city lights, the Navy cross a small beacon on his chest. "Sergeant Henderson," she began, still finding it hard to reconcile the quiet man from the park bench with the decorated hero before her. "Thomas, please," he said, turning to her with a faint smile. "After all these years, I think you've earned the right." "Thomas," she tried, the name feeling unfamiliar yet right. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Or anyone?" He looked down at the medal, his expression thoughtful. "There was nothing to tell, Miss Amelia. I did what any soldier would do for his men. What happened after, that was a different war. A quieter one, and one I mostly lost." He paused, then met her gaze. "Until you started leaving those paper bags. You didn't ask questions. You didn't judge. You just were there. Every morning. That consistency, that simple, undemanding kindness, it was a lifeline. More than the food." He gestured vaguely. "These men," he said, indicating the Marines, "they remember the soldier. You, Miss Amelia, you saw the man. And you treated him with honor, even when he had forgotten what that felt like himself." His words were a profound gift, more meaningful than any public accolade. They affirmed that her instincts, her quiet acts of compassion, had indeed mattered, had indeed touched a life in a way she could never have anticipated. It underscored a truth she had always intuitively known, that the greatest acts of service are often not those performed on a grand stage, but those woven into the simple, daily fabric of our interactions with others. If you believe that every individual carries an untold story of value, and that simple acts of kindness can unlock unimaginable depths of human connection, type honor in the comments below. The presence of the Marines and the revelation of Sergeant Thomas Henderson's past cast a profound and beautiful light over the remainder of Amelia and David's wedding celebration. The atmosphere was imbued with a sense of gratitude and shared humanity that few wedding receptions ever achieve. The initial shock had given way to a quiet reverence, and then to a renewed sense of joy, deeper and more meaningful than before. Guests who had previously only offered polite congratulations now sought out Amelia and David with heartfelt expressions of admiration for Amelia's character. Even the most cynical of relatives seemed touched by the extraordinary display of loyalty and respect. David, ever her steadfast supporter, beamed with pride, his arm rarely leaving Amelia's side. He had always known her compassionate nature, but seeing it acknowledged on such a grand scale and understanding the true depth of its impact filled him with an even deeper love for her. As the evening drew to a close and the Marines prepared to depart, the colonel approached Amelia and Sergeant Henderson, who were engaged in a quiet conversation. "Sergeant Henderson," the colonel said, "we have made arrangements. You won't be returning to the park bench tonight, or any night." He explained that a veteran support organization, alerted by his unit, had already secured temporary housing for Thomas, with a more permanent solution in the works. They would also ensure he received all the back pay, benefits, and medical care he was entitled to, resources that had been lost to him through a combination of bureaucratic oversight and his own quiet withdrawal from society. Thomas listened, his expression stoic, but Amelia saw the flicker of relief and perhaps a touch of fear in his eyes. The prospect of change, even positive change, could be daunting after so many years of entrenched hardship. Amelia gently placed her hand on his arm. "It's okay, Thomas," she said softly. "It's a new beginning." He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "Thank you, Colonel. Thank you all." The Marines departed as they had arrived, with quiet discipline and profound dignity. Their exit left a void, but also an indelible imprint on everyone who had witnessed their tribute. Before the last of them left, the young Marine who had spoken to Amelia earlier sought her out one last time. He pressed a small, folded object into her hand. "This is my unit's challenge coin, ma'am," he said. "We give them for excellence, for embodying our core values. We think you deserve one." Amelia unfolded it to see a burnished bronze coin, heavy in her palm, bearing the insignia of his Marine unit. It was a simple token, yet it represented so much more. It was a symbol of belonging, of shared values, of respect earned. Later, as the final guest departed and the ballroom slowly emptied, Amelia found herself standing with David and Thomas near the now-cleared tables. The remnants of the celebration lay around them, a fallen flower, a discarded napkin, the faint scent of champagne and cake in the air. Thomas looked at Amelia, his eyes holding a lifetime of unspoken gratitude. "Miss Amelia," he said, his voice raspy but firm, "you gave me more than breakfast. You gave me back myself. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Amelia smiled, her heart full. "There's nothing to repay, Thomas. You've given me a gift today, too. A reminder of what truly matters." David put his arm around Thomas's shoulder. "We're family now, Thomas, in a way. You'll always have a place with us." The outreach worker who would be taking Thomas to his new temporary lodging arrived, a kind-faced woman with understanding eyes. As Thomas prepared to leave with her, he paused and turned back to Amelia one last time. He didn't offer a handshake, but instead, with a formality that was both touching and heartbreaking, he gave a slight, respectful bow. "May your life together be filled with every happiness, Miss Amelia. You deserve it." And then he was gone, stepping out into the night, no longer a forgotten man on a park bench, but Sergeant Thomas Henderson, a hero reclaimed, on the path to a new life. Amelia watched him go, the challenge coin warm in her hand. The wedding had been more extraordinary than she could ever have imagined. It wasn't just the union of two people, but the intersection of countless stories, a testament to the hidden connections that bind us all, and the profound impact of choosing kindness, even when, especially when, no one is watching. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that acts of compassion, no matter how small they seem, can change lives in ways we can scarcely predict. And never forget that behind every face, there is a story waiting to be acknowledged. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind of thank you notes,